I'm Amy, and today we're going to be talking about ancestry searches. We're going to talk about some new features that ancestry searches have, as well as little tips and tricks and hints that will help you get the most out of your searches. First, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Aimee Cross. I have been working on my genealogy for 40 years, and I have been working professionally for 7. And I love it. I love genealogy. I love the exciting challenge. I love the detective work. I love helping people find their family because it's always a very meaningful thing. So if you're wanting to find your family, kudos to you. Hopefully this will help. So let's dive in. I run into a lot of people that primarily use the hints and they don't really know how to search. And even if they do, they don't know how to manipulate the search in a way that is helpful for them. So today we're going to talk a lot about that. So let's say you've exhausted your hints, or maybe you even haven't, but there was a couple other things you wanted to do before you adopted some hints. And just maybe check some things out and things like that, which is always a good thing to do. This is my teaching tree. It's not complete, and I have another tree that I work on, but it gives me the opportunity to illustrate some principles and some things that I can't do on my tree because I've already got things attached and whatnot. So let me take you to George Paston, my great-grandfather. So I'm going to ignore these hints for now, and we're just going to go to the search button right here at the top right. And that means I'm going to be searching for records pertaining to George Paston. Just so that you know, if I wanted to do a search that really wasn't for George, a clean search that didn't have his information in it, I would go up here to this search button and I would either do all collections or specify census and voter lists, birth, marriage and death, immigration. I can look at other trees, military, and then their card catalog, which is another great place as well. So back over here to search, I'm going to click search. These are my results for George E. Paston. Here at the top, I have George with his parents that I haven't inputted yet, with his 2 daughters and his wife. And then I have his results. And the first thing that they show me are other ancestry trees, which they can be helpful sometimes, but please be careful. So many of them are wrong. Don't look at these other trees a lot. Look at the records, okay, first. By far, look at the records first. And then down below here, they have the results that you already have in your tree, which is very helpful. And one of the things that a lot of people don't know about is once Ancestry puts a record in your tree, they'll stop looking for that same record in most instances. For instance, if you have right now I have the 1930 census in the tree. And as a result, they're not going to show me any other 1930 census records for George, which can be a problem, especially if that name is common, George Paston, right? And so if you have somebody that has a common name, or you want to make sure that you're not looking at somebody that's the wrong family, you need to do this little trick, and a lot of people don't know it. They used to call it smart filtering, turning smart filtering on or off, and they've just added this and changed it a little bit, and they have this active thing, and they have this as recommended. So what they're doing, and they kind of tell you that the smart filtering removes results already saved for your person, hints that you've ignored for your person, and results that almost never offer more discoveries beyond what you've already saved. Well, maybe I don't like that. Maybe I do want to see all the census records. So I can just turn that off. I can turn it to inactive. And then what it's going to do is it's going to add in my searches that include that 1932 census. I refreshed the page because the system is just not working well today. So here I see the 1930 census, but this is one of their new changes that I really like. They've added in here save to your tree, and they've added when you last looked at that record. So that's really helpful. So make sure you're aware of that active-inactive setting right there, because there's a lot of times that I want to see if there may be other census possibilities for my ancestor so that I don't adopt the incorrect census and just say, oh, this has to be him because there's nobody else that fits the bill. That may not be true. So you want to be looking at something like this. You want to be looking for other people that may have the same name, and that also helps you know that, there's a George Paston who was born at the same time period, and he lived in Iowa, and I need to be making sure that I don't mix these 2 guys up. So anyway, important thing to know. So if you look down here too, and this is an example of this, if you look down here, you see that there's a George Paston in 1920, and I'm going to hover over this, and that will give me the details, which is really nice. I don't have to go into the record. And it shows me that he resided at 1443 Broderick Street, which I know is where he and my great-grandmother resided with my grandmother. It says it was indexed that he was a sig-faring man, he was a seafaring man. and he was at sea all the time. He was the chief steward, or he worked his way up to being chief steward on ships, and so he was constantly going in and out of San Francisco on different boats. So there's a lot of passenger lists for him as well, which we'll get to that in a minute. It says he was naturalized. It says his wife is Aimee Paston, his daughters Aimee and Georgette with the correct names. This is my great-grandfather. But I'd like to point out that voila, here we have another census, also in San Francisco, a George Paston born in England. He was born the same year as my great-grandfather, born in England. It says that he's the chief steward of a ship. And that's interesting. And then there's this list of all these guys that are in their 30s, 40s, well, all different ages, a bunch of men together. And so I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Let me look at this record. I can go to this image. I can view the image. So here we have a bunch of guys. They all worked on a ship right down here. All of these individuals worked on a ship, and they all had different responsibilities. And this George Paston was chief steward. Well, I know this was my George. So, and this census was taken on the SS Maui, which I also know that he worked on that ship. So George, my George, was enumerated twice. And this second record did not show up in his hints because the first one showed him with his family. So when the census enumerator, either on a different day or just came to the family and asked for the people that resided in the family, he may have talked to my great-grandmother and she talked about her husband and her children, which would be expected, right? But here, then they also went to the ship and enumerated him on the ship. So I have an additional record. And maybe something in this record provided information that I didn't already have. Like this one delineated his actual title of his job as chief steward. So anyway, fun little thing there. So one of the other things that I want to show you about your search is this over here. A lot of people aren't aware of that. And if you click on this, you can start a new search. But if you click on this little pen, you can change the features of your search. I'm going to go to that in just a minute. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. I also want to show you these little sliders right here. So they're saying abroad for George, meaning they could be looking for G or GEO or something like that. Or you could have something exact. Same with the last name. This is exact, sounds like, and similar. I could make it more specific, exact and similar, or I could make it exact. So I can change these sliders. I could say that he was born in 1870, or he was born within 5 years of 1870, or he was born in 2 years. Do you see what I'm saying? So these are very helpful sliders when you're trying to narrow down search results. One of the other things that a lot of people miss here is that you can search different collections. You can search either by various country, or you can search by ethnicity, African American, Jewish, or Native American, which can be really helpful as well. But don't always rely on those things. You know, if you're searching for an African American ancestor or somebody that was Native American, sometimes they were listed as mulatto, or they were listed as white, or they were listed, and Native Americans particularly frequently were enumerated as white. So you can look at that, but play around with it a little bit. Try different collections. So let me go back to this little edit thing here. I click that pencil and I can change some of this information. I can say that he lived in a particular place. Like, let's say I knew specifically where he lived in England, or he lived in a different place in the United States. I can add that in. If I know a marriage date, or if I know something like that, I can add that in. I can add in children. I can change his gender. I can add race information. I'll be honest with you, as a professional researcher, I usually don't play with this because it just doesn't usually give me good results. Sometimes when you're adjusting your search, less is more. So I really recommend that you play with different things, that you look at taking away maybe the birth location or even the birth year sometimes. Sometimes I'll run a search and I'll do a male Paston of a particular age if the name is unusual and I think maybe the enumerator heard it wrong. So be creative in how you play around with things and make sure that you don't lock yourself into one way of thinking, because you're likely going to make a mistake that way. The better searches sometimes are more open-ended. Sometimes I'll take off all of the other family members because they're mudding things up, particularly with women. What happens on a woman's search is that it takes her first name and then it lists her maiden name and then it lists her multiple married names. And if a woman has been married multiple times, there'll be a bunch of names there. And a lot of times the search results that I'm seeing, let's say I'm looking for a death record, and the search results that I'm seeing will go over all of these records for somebody with the last name that is her maiden name, or something like that. Or if I'm looking for a marriage record, that's something that happens a lot. The results are getting muddied up by all of her other names. I want to show you an example of the marriage search because that is frequently one that a lot of people get kind of hooked up on. My grandmother married a second time, and so I want to go here to her search, and I want to go down to birth, marriage, and death, and I want to go to marriage and divorce. Now, this marriage record is showing up in her hints, probably because I've already saved it to my tree, and that does drive Ancestry hints. But actually, that's part of the reason sometimes where hints are wrong, that somebody has adopted hints into their tree, so Ancestry assumes that that is a correct hint for your person. But let me just show you how I would search for her to find this record if it was not showing up. I would go in here to this little pencil, and I would take out, because she was Georgette Stevenson at the time of her second marriage. So I would take Paston out of here. I would take off her parents and her husband. And then I would click search. And now my search results are going to give me, instead of Georgette Paston's, I'm going to see more records for Georgette Stevenson. Now, one of the things that Ancestry has added in this new update is this browse by category. And if you click on that, this is kind of nice. It will show you all of the census and voter lists that he's finding. And there's more. There's tons more. So you can click on that to see all of them. Birth, marriage, death. Military records, immigration and immigration, newspapers and periodicals, pictures, etc. So you can do it that way. I don't normally use that, mostly because it's new. But what I do a lot of times is I'll use these filters over here on the side. So if I click on census and voters lists, then I can narrow it down to a particular census record. And I can, so like if I'm looking for somebody in the let's see, George was born in 1870, but he didn't get to the United States. So let's say I'm looking for George in the 1910 census. I can click on that, and then I'm only going to see 1910 census records, or because I have all collections, I'll also see things in England as well. But it'll narrow it down to certain records, which sometimes when I'm trying to find the missing census record, it's things like this that help me do so. Now, let's say I'm looking for a death record. I can go here to birth, marriage, and death. And then I can further get it down to death, burial, and cemetery and obituary records. And here he is in the California Death Index. This is in my hints. But there's a George Paston who died in Pennsylvania. Or his daughter died in Pennsylvania. His wife was Emma. So do you see I'm finding different records? If I wanted to narrow it down further, if I just wanted to look at Find a Grave, I can do that. Use your filters. They make all the difference in the world. Let me show you an example of a couple others. If I click on this X, I'll go back, and then I can look at court, land, wills, and financial records. Now, a lot of these are for other places. These do not pertain to my George, but maybe there would have been a record that did. I can go to immigration and immigration. Is that how you say that? I don't know. Anyway, so here I'm seeing all of these passenger lists. Now, I can tell you from experience of my other tree, these are all my George, the ones that are coming into San Francisco and Honolulu, because he went into Honolulu. So these are all my George. But let's say I wanted to find his naturalization paperwork. Here are citizenship records, so I can click that. Now, I want to go to the passenger lists, because there's another little feature that a lot of people aren't aware of that really helps me as a professional researcher find passenger lists. If I go here to passenger lists and I'm in that section, I'm in that filter, when I go up here to my little pencil, all of a sudden I have a new area of things that I can input. So if I know by a census record, because census records sometimes asked when they came into the country, or if I know by, let's say I had his naturalization paperwork and I knew when he came into the United States and what port he first came into, passenger lists can be difficult because there are often so many people by a given name in a particular time period, particularly like in a time period where there was a lot of people immigrating to the United States in the middle to the late 1800s. And so that can make all the difference in me successfully finding somebody's passenger list. So these are the little tricks that a lot of people aren't aware of that will help them in their ancestry searches. I really hope this has been helpful to you. Please give it a like if it has. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and that way you'll be notified of when more of my videos come up. It's a fairly new channel, and I appreciate your support. Searching on Ancestry is really a bit of a game of trial and error. And I think sometimes people are kind of afraid. You're not going to break it. You're not going to do anything wrong. Be creative in your searches. Remember, sometimes less can be more. And it may give you but if there's too many records, use those sliders on the side to narrow things down, to narrow a particular area of the country down or things like that. And you'll find that your search results are much more productive. And remember, there's lots of things that are going to come up in the searches that are not going to show up in your hints. So be sure to take advantage of those searches. Have a great day. Thanks.